Hey, welcome to the Explainer. If you've ever tried to learn a new language, you've actually been part of this huge educational experiment, whether you realized it at the time or not. And the big puzzle, the question at the heart of it all, is this. How in the world do you build a course that can turn a total beginner into a fluent speaker? I mean, it sounds simple enough, right? But this one question splits language teachers into two completely different camps. It's fascinating, really. Do you start with the raw materials, the nuts and bolts of the language, or do you just kind of throw someone into the deep end and see if they can swim? Okay, let's think about it like this. Are you an architect or are you an explorer? The architect, they believe you have to start with a super detailed blueprint. You master the grammar rules, piece by tiny piece, before you can even think about building something meaningful. But the explorer? Peh, they say forget the blueprint. The best way to learn a new place is to just start walking, to navigate real conversations and figure out the rules as you go. All right, so first up, let's take a walk through the architect's workshop. This is that traditional, super structured approach that, let's be honest, a lot of us probably remember from school, right? The whole idea is to build a rock-solid foundation first. So if we want to get technical for a second, the architect's method is called a synthetic syllabus, or sometimes a product-oriented syllabus. Now, synthetic here doesn't mean fake. It means to synthesize, to build something up from its parts. The core belief is that a language is just a big collection of rules, and if you can master each little part one after the other, you'll eventually assemble the whole thing. And the key thing to get here is how rigid and linear it is. I mean, you start with one building block, let's say the present simple tense. You drill it, you test it, and only when you've got that down cold do you move on to the next block, like the past simple. Everything is systematic, it's predictable, and it is very, very controlled. Okay, but with this approach, there's a pretty clear trade-off. On the plus side, it's super organized, right? Your progress is easy to track, and it's a piece of cake to test. But the downsides are pretty big. For one, real, actual conversation can get pushed back for months, sometimes even years. And there's this massive risk that students just end up memorizing a bunch of rules without ever really learning how to, use the language in a real-life chat. So if that whole architect thing feels a little, a bit too stiff for you, let's flip the script and see how the explorer handles things. This approach is all about immersion. It's about context, and it's about learning by doing. The explorer's approach is called an analytic syllabus, or process-oriented. An analytic here is basically the opposite of synthetic. It means you start with the whole thing and you break it down. So learners get these real, authentic chunks of language, like an actual menu from a restaurant or a city map or a short video. And their job isn't to study the language, it's to complete a real task. The language itself becomes a tool you use to get something done, not the thing you're studying. So what does this look like in practice? Well, first, the focus is on meaning. Getting your point across comes first. Perfect grammar can wait. Every single task has a real-world goal, like, say, planning a trip or trying to solve a puzzle with a partner. And here's the kicker. The language is acquired incidentally. You just kind of pick up the grammar and the words you need as you go, because you need them to finish the mission. And this idea was actually put to a famous test back in the 80s. It was called the Bangalore Project, led by a guy named N.S. Prabhu. His team had students learn English just by solving logic puzzles and reasoning problems. No direct grammar lessons at all. And what they found was wild. These students developed communicative fluency just as well as the students in traditional classrooms, and in some cases, even better. His conclusion was pretty radical. It's the process of doing things that creates the learning. Okay, so right now, you're probably thinking you have to pick a side, right? Team architect or team explorer. But the truth is, modern language teaching is way more nuanced than that. It's really more of a spectrum. Yeah, the big shift really started back in the 1970s with something called the notional functional syllabus. This was huge because, for the first time, courses weren't organized around grammar points anymore. They were organized around things people actually do with language. So a chapter in your textbook wouldn't be the conditional tense. It would be something like making suggestions or how to apologize. This was really the first big step into the explorer's territory. And then came the lexical syllabus. This idea argued that fluency isn't really about mastering grammar rules. It's about mastering thousands of lexical chunks. Those ready-made phrases we use all the time without even thinking. I mean, think about it. You don't build the phrase "on the other hand" from scratch every time you say it, do you? No. You know it as one single block. And this approach says, hey, let's just teach those blocks directly. So, this whole architect versus explorer debate is pretty fascinating, but why does it really matter? What's the big deal? Well, let's look at a real world example where this exact tension plays out every single day. Let's take a look at Bangladesh. Their national curriculum for English is, on paper, all about communication. It's totally designed by the explorers. The goal is to create students who can actually use English out in the real world. But there's a huge catch. The big, high-stakes national exams are designed by the architects, and they focus almost entirely on specific, nitty-gritty grammar rules. And as you can see, here's what happens. The curriculum might have these lofty communicative goals, but at the end of the day, it's the exams that determine a student's future. So what do you think happens in the classroom? It becomes all about grammar drills. The test essentially dictates everything about the teaching. This conflict is a textbook example of something educators call the washback effect. All the amazing aims of the curriculum, things like fluency and problem solving, they just get washed away by what the exam demands, which is memorizing rules and transforming sentences. It's like, even if you give teachers an explorer's map, you're forcing them to build with the architect's blueprint, because that's what's on the final test. So, where does that leave us? How do we solve this puzzle? If a purely architect approach isn't great, and a purely explorer approach runs into trouble in the real world, what's the answer? Well, it turns out the most effective modern approaches have figured it out. The answer isn't or, it's and. It's not about choosing between the architect and the explorer. It's about getting them to finally work together. People often call this a hybrid model, or my favorite term, a principled compromise. It really is about taking the best of both worlds. So you get a clear structural spine from the architect, that logical progression of grammar that gives the course clarity and, helps you pass those exams. But, and this is the key, you embed all that grammar inside meaningful task-based stuff from the explorer, where students are actually using the language to communicate. The teacher points out the grammar, the form, but only when it's needed to get the task done. The ultimate goal, to balance both accuracy and fluency. So, I want you to think about this. The next time you reflect on learning a language, think about the design behind it all. Think about your own experience. Was your language class more like an architect's workshop, where you were carefully assembling all the little pieces one by one? Or was it more like an explorer's expedition, where you were navigating brand new territory, kind of drawing the map as you went? The answer, I think, says a whole lot about what we believe it truly means to learn a language.